This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use, but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Sunday night around 8:20 p.m. Central Time as we record this show. The time is key because we've seen trade activity pick up quite a bit around Major League Baseball, especially from the Tampa Bay Rays, who traded Randy Arozarena to Seattle as their headliner, but they've already made 4 trades so far. The White Sox, 0. Both Erick Fedde and Garrett Crochet pitched this weekend against the Mariners. Neither had a great results, but shouldn't impact their market. We'll discuss the latest gossip regarding White Sox trade targets and share what we have heard. Plus, the White Sox losing streak extends to 14 games for the second time this season. And officially, the White Sox will not have a winning season in 2024. The fact that this was all accomplished before the trade deadline is depressing as hell. But we got some future White Sox manager rumors. Is AJ Pierzynski really the leading candidate to replace Pedro Grifol? At the end, we'll discuss what's catching our attention around Major League Baseball as the postseason races are getting tighter. So let's get started. Joining me are Sox Machine's beat reporter James Fegan and managing editor Jim Margulis. And James and Jim, hello. James, we recorded the midweek show, and we're hoping that maybe, just maybe, there would be an emergency podcast between then and now as we record this episode. That obviously hasn't happened. Chris Getz has yet to make a trade, and White Sox fans are getting very impatient. So fill us in. What's the latest you've heard about upcoming activity for the White Sox?
Speak for yourself. I'd like 5 p.m. Getz strolls down from his... I feel like I'd sound like Rick Hahn saying I only want to talk about lower body injuries, but like they just broke all 6 trades by themselves and announced it and had them all official, ready to go. That would be like the easiest work day ever. Like, it's like, I know as a reporter, we're supposed to want things like come out as soon as possible. I'd love to break a trade. Someone please tell me what they're doing. But I would love no emergency podcasts. That'd be my perfect workflow. Probably not great for.
So you want the Brave style.
Yeah.
You get a press release. Hey, here's the 6 trades we made.
But not even like just Brave style, but also just like telling us very specifically, and then like it's all ready and done. I don't know, like all at once. That's what I'm hoping for. Everyone kind of says that the Sox are asking for the moon, which will be great if that's what they get on Tuesday, and will be something that will second guess to hell if it results in, well, one, I think it's very realistic that we could be pondering like, are they safe, or are they still going to get good value down the road, or are they still going to make the most out of if they have Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet on hand, even though those aren't necessarily like toxic assets where how could you not dump that? Like it wouldn't be the same way we'd analyze, like, not that Tommy Pham's a toxic asset, but if he was still here at the deadline, we'd be kind of like, what was the plan here? Was it always for Tommy Pham to play out his age 36 season on the worst team in franchise history? Because that doesn't seem kind of long-term goals. But I think we're still at a point where just Tommy Edman rumors, we're still safe. We're still at a point where it's hard to really judge this kind of brinkmanship approach where we're like, all I'm hearing is scoffing, like, oh, they asked for this. Can you believe it? They asked for Gilbert Diaz for Michael Kopech. They asked for Jordan Walker plus for Erick Fedde. Can you believe that type of responses? What if they have those 2 players in 2 days? And then it looks great. But if it's in some situation where or, depending on your opinion of Jordan Walker, it looks great. Then it looks like some situation where they held their line, they were in a seller's market, and they pushed it to the brink, and they got their reward, and they played the market right. Whereas if they're left holding the bag on a bunch of assets where you can kind of only see their value going down, or it seems like extreme risks, or really all they're going to do is just lose for nothing at the end of the year, then we're like, why did they overplay their hand in a market that our first experience of this front office was seemingly not meeting the moment and getting value out of a season where really there's nothing being provided on field. So if you can't come up with a prospect boost at the deadline, you kind of wonder what you accomplished this season.
That's a great point, James. And James even mentioned in early June that Chris Getz was trying to jump the market but couldn't find any takers. And to James's point, all of a sudden, maybe a little bit out of the blue, the team that's selling the most is the Tampa Bay Rays. And with them trading away their players, like I mentioned, already 4 trades, at least to me, the contending teams that want to add, or maybe even a team like the Chicago Cubs, in which they're adding for the near future, they're looking for impact in 2025 and beyond, that other teams are more interested in what the Rays have to offer than the White Sox. And I wonder, Jim, if that right now is complicating matters for Chris Getz trying to get deals done before the deadline.
It could. I mean, the Rays have a history of being very decisive, very transactional. And I think that's been one of the knocks on the White Sox, is that, year after year, whether it's because they tried and failed or whether they just couldn't do it, whether they couldn't produce like players who other teams were interested in, but you get in situations where like Danny Mendick keeps coming back, or Adam Engel keeps coming back, or just these fringe players, they never swap them out. Spot starters keep coming back because they just either get too complacent with the guys they have up top. And so if they're that complacent up top, they don't worry much about the 25th or 26th man on the roster, or whether it's just they believe in their own player development or get too attached to what they have. And so there's not a whole lot of change. And when the first plan falls through, they really don't have any recourse. Whereas the Rays, and I think the Mariners are a good trade partner for the Rays, because the Mariners are their West Coast equals in terms of getting deals done and having very little sentimentality for players. And that's both, I think, to their benefit and their detriment, because we've heard a lot of complaining from Mariners fans about how much activity they conduct without any upward trajectory, or like not a clear one or not distinct one, and they really haven't accomplished as much as people thought they might. And you just get an idea of like whether it's just more of a distraction, that Jerry Dipoto just makes 100 and something moves during his tenure in order to look like he's doing something, but the big picture is kind of lost. But when you have like teams that are that transactional, and like Rays pop up and say, we don't like this team this year. Like we heard Chris Getz say, I don't like this team. Like that's essentially what the Rays are saying, even though they're barely out of the postseason race. I think, maybe their stance is that because of how little name brand talent they have, they do have to believe in what they have in the field and what they have right behind it. And if they don't, then they have to act quickly before the assets they have get stale, or, other teams beat them to the punch. And so they have to act. So it is, it is a compelling subplot of this deadline that the Rays come up and, we'll see if they beat them to the punch. Right now, there aren't a whole lot of overlaps. Like Randy Arozarena is an outfielder and Luis Robert Jr. is an outfielder, but they're different kinds and they're under different, terms and such. So, it's not a 1-for-1, and, they traded reliever and they traded, an infielder. So, I mean, like they've traded positions the White Sox really don't have in the, they have like Paul DeYoung, but that's not quite the same as like Isaac Paredes. So like, isn't quite a direct overlap to say that the Rays have beat the White Sox, but there's enough going on right now that, they could very much like when the dust settles, and if the Rays make transformative moves and the White Sox haven't done much, they are one of the teams that can make them look bad.
And to that point, Jim, like I slightly disagree with you, because Seattle needed an outfielder to get Randy Arozarena. That totally makes sense. Arozarena, especially his postseason track record. If he continues to hit like he always has in the postseason, Jim, then suddenly Seattle could be really interesting if they can get into the postseason, if they can run down the Houston Astros and still win the American League West. And Arozarena had a good weekend against the White Sox.
Yeah, it is an outfielder. It's more of like I guess they're both buy low, but I think the Rays were like, yeah, we'll sell if the price is right. Whereas the White Sox, I think with Luis Robert, really want to get a return that doesn't feel like bailing on him because of what he meant and how he is like one of the few true trade chits they have left.
Right. It's just that Seattle, we knew that they needed an outfielder, especially with Julio Rodriguez hurt. They got an outfielder. Baltimore needed a starting pitcher. They get Zach Eflin. San Diego needs a right-handed reliever, and they get Jason Adam. Like San Diego, Seattle, Baltimore were able to fill like their biggest needs coming up to the trade deadline thanks to the Tampa Bay Rays. So the Rays have been the ones filling and helping out the teams that do want to contend and make it to the postseason. And it's not the White Sox, where maybe a month ago the industry thought whoever the White Sox have that's actually good and other teams would covet, they would be the ones making mass transactions before the deadline. And that just hasn't happened yet, with that being the key word. Because again, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central Time is the trade deadline. So let's run down as far as the White Sox trade assets and what the latest gossip and rumors are. Starting with Garrett Crochet, Bob Nightingale of USA Today feels like the Los Angeles Dodgers are not concerned with what Garrett Crochet put out in the public along with his agency CAA about the idea that he would like a contract extension to protect himself. And we talked about this in our previous episode of the Sox Machine podcast. James did a very good job breaking down in the perspective of Garrett Crochet, and even got an excellent quote from Paul DeYoung after the series, and DeYoung understanding and especially looking at it from Crochet's point of view that he's just trying to protect himself. We've seen the Dodgers do this move recently, James, with Tyler Glasnow of Tampa Bay, who wanted a contract extension. The Dodgers traded for Glasnow, and they got that contract extension done before this season started, and right now that move's looking to pay off for the Dodgers. Do you think it's possible the Dodgers can make this same play again, but this time with Garrett Crochet?
Yeah, I think they could. I think they possibly would be an organization that could, one, pitch maybe a flexible usage plan to Crochet, and also say like, hey, we'll take care of you, or we'll talk about this more in the offseason. It might have more credibility than, if he's getting, rifled off to generic wild card contender X that doesn't have any history of, one, necessarily the track player to have track record of the Dodgers, or the financial resources where you kind of know the wherewithal to make it complete. The extension you're looking for is in house. Right? Like if you get traded to the Brewers, and you're looking for an $150 million extension, maybe a bit more stringent about what the terms will be. So yeah, I could see. I mean, I know like the immediate reaction was a lot of like doom and gloom, like, oh, he'll never get traded now. But I did at least to try to couch it when I wrote about it, to like limits his field to maybe deep-pocketed, very motivated buyers. And I think the Dodgers could easily fit that, and could easily look at Garrett's raw tools and be like, 2 pitches, he'll have 6 pitches by the time we're done with them, or something like that. So yeah, that would compute if that's something like that went down.
So when it comes to Luis Robert, we might as well also bring Erick Fedde to this talking point, Jim, because the Atlanta Braves right now, they are holding their breath. Old friend Ronaldo Lopez left his last start with forearm tightness, and then he immediately flew back to the team's facilities in Atlanta. So the Braves are in a holding pattern. Again, this could be another significant injury for the Atlanta Braves, but the Braves never sit still when it comes to the trade deadline. They are feeling some heat now from the New York Mets. The Braves a month ago, and this sounds familiar with the Mariners and Astros, but a month ago, the Braves were 10 games ahead of the Mets. Now it's just a game and a half. So the Braves are fighting to stay in second place of the National League East and fighting for one of the wild card spots in the National League. So they're sweating here, Jim. So is it the Braves? Because a month ago, some people were contemplating that maybe the Dodgers could be the crazy ones to trade for both Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert. hypothetically speaking, is it possible, and even in Atlanta style, where they would be the ones to trade for Luis Robert to help fill in the void of Ronald Acuna being out for the season and Erick Fedde?
The one thing I wonder about is, when the Braves were a trade partner with the White Sox over the offseason with the Aaron Bummer trade, the 5-for-1, they came up a couple times too with like Dylan Cease, and when we batted around the idea of Cease going home to Georgia and pitching for the Braves, we looked at their prospect list and thought, not a whole lot. There are some interesting guys, but kind of along the line. And it turns out that the White Sox ended up trading Cease for pitching, so it ended up being the same thing. I think this is when we were thinking that they were really going to go gun for position player talent, and the Braves really didn't have any. Is I wonder, with just how many injuries they've had and how they've had to dip into their prospect depth already, do they have the prospect capital to pull off multiple trades and really dig deep? Because the White Sox have scouted them, so I assume if there's a deal to be made, they know what the Braves have and what they want, but they have so many holes right now, and I wonder if they're better off taking like casting a wide net for solutions, kind of like they did in their World Series year, where they just kind of rebuilt the bullpen, Eddie Rosario, and just did a bulk addition. Jock Peterson just went for as many solutions as possible and tried to find something that helped and find a working arrangement in the outfield, find a working order in the bullpen, versus trying to go for one or two killer solutions. In the case of Robert, like, given how many injuries he's had, if he just comes to Atlanta and ends up in the injury prone pile, then they're kind of back where they started. So I think, maybe if Lopez doesn't get hurt and they only need one starter, perhaps you could see him pony up, but they have a lot of holes to fill, and they're kind of taking on water right now. And you can see them either saying this might not be our year, or it might be a case of just trying to buy in the bulk section just to see if they can get as many possible solutions, rotate guys in and out to find a working mix. And if it doesn't work, then they at least didn't mortgage their future for a team that just had too many things go wrong.
Well, at their fan convention before the season, Alex Anthopoulos, the general manager, president of baseball ops for the Atlanta Braves, I have to find the video on Twitter and share it in the podcast post, because there's a fan that walks behind him and asks, why didn't we get Dylan Cease? And Alex spins his chair to the fan and said, the price tag was too high. And what did the Braves do? They pivoted and they got Chris Sale. And that trade is working out great for the Atlanta Braves. Out of all the seasons of mishaps and everything, that's really working out well for the Braves. I wonder, is it possible, Jim, they're just too invested, despite everything crumbling and them accidentally stepping into landmines when it comes to injuries, and they're not getting great seasons offensively from Austin Riley or Matt Olson. Both of them are really struggling this year. It just feels like Marcell Ozuna is the one carrying the Braves offense. But because of Sale, because of Max Fried, if Reynaldo Lopez, if he avoids a long-term injury scare, if he's just going to go on the injured list and miss a few starts and come back, I just don't see the Braves taking a step back and letting teams like the Mets, the Diamondbacks pass them by and not make the postseason. I just don't see that in the Braves' behavior.
I don't see it either. I just think that when it comes to, if the White Sox are asking for the moon for Fedde, and if they are taking the same approach with Robert because there's less of a time pressure to deal him versus somebody like Fedde, I don't know if the Braves have the capital, to really answer that. I can see them saying, well, we'll just try to come up with 2 or 3 solutions elsewhere that don't require the players the White Sox are asking for.
Now, speaking of Fedde, James, the St. Louis Cardinals, they've been hot on the trail. Ken Rosenthal is reporting the Milwaukee Brewers are also very interested in Erick Fedde. Anyone else interested in Erick Fedde that you have heard of?
It's I tried to downplay the meaningfulness of the Diamondbacks or the Phillies or the Mets scouting him the other night. It's kind of like a situation, I was joking with Scott there, if this was 90-95, there'd be 26 scouts there. The degree to which you need to have somebody in-house when you have so many targets on the deadline, you kind of at least want to have the value of everybody. it really doesn't necessarily one-to-one translate to like there's hot interest. It certainly shows like kind of how wide his net is a little bit, but I think, at least from what we know publicly, there's like a half dozen teams in that have a logical need, and I think he's in this sort of sweet price range, which I think was what kind of Jim was talking about with Randy Rosarina, where he's above the market of like a Tommy Pham rental, but below like the 3.5 years or 4 years of control with Luis Robert, where you have to weigh in the potential superstar stealing. It's like this is a 120 WRC plus corner outfielder for 2.5 years. We know what this costs. I think Fedde's kind of in a sweet spot of affordability where it's above pure rental, but it's not like, do we mortgage the future to get Garrett Crochet because we think he's the ace for years to come? Or is like, this is 1.5 years of a guy who can start a playoff game and can be a solid mid-rotation guy next season. Like, and that's something we can take out of our budget for free agency next year while also giving us a boost this year. I think he's just in a price point, or at least he should be, based on his value, where it fits pretty much everybody. Like Fedde would improve like 30 out of 30 rotations, except for the one that he's already on. So there's no team that you could really rule him out from. And as much as I think on principle, the Central Division teams not being in it would be a mistake, I think they're certainly in a situation where it's not like, well, if we don't get their offers, we won't have any. I think they're just trying to make it play up beyond the typical 1.5 year value towards like, this is the AL WAR leader, and there's few other options. Like this should be treated as like a low level number 2, and seeing whether they're going to move off of that at the last second, or if they're going to get people to buckle at the last second, owing to a larger field being in.
And then Michael Kopech. Jim, we always see the last minute dash as the deadline approaches. Teams trying to get as many relievers as possible. I have to imagine Michael Kopech's going to be one of those relievers. Do you feel that Kopech gets dealt before the deadline?
I think he does, partially because the White Sox, depending on how he finished the season, you never quite know how Kopech's going to finish the season with how, injury history, with the way his performance oscillates, is that all it takes is one good offer, one substantial, prospect being included, even if it is like more of a lottery ticket, A-ball, rookie ball type, to meet the White Sox asking price. Like I can see them having like a prospect in mind or a type in mind where if they get that guy, they're just like, yeah, let's do it. Let's not think twice, because we've seen the lows of Kopech, and, the closer he gets to the free agency, the fact that he can be, non-tendered if it goes really wrong. I don't think it would get to that point, but just, there's a lot of uncertainty that the White Sox are inviting by keeping him, that if there is a price, he can be met. I just think there's a difference between like the Rays, trading somebody like Jason Adam, where he's a credible versatile reliever against righties and lefties, whereas Kopech is, I guess, he is versatile in the sense that like, he can pitch more than an inning, and, he's used to like taking on a little bit more workload, but not so much in terms of his adaptability, his arsenal. It's pretty much what you see is what you get. And sometimes he can't place what he's giving. So that's why I think it's going to be a team that doesn't need him to be the guy. And if he happens to unlock that one thing that has kept him from being that sort of high leverage reliever on a reliable basis, then that team will say, great, awesome. That's one more October weapon we have. But if it doesn't work, and if he has like a Lucas Giolito post trade type unraveling, teams don't feel that broken up about it. Figure still worth taking, still worth working with him in the offseason and seeing if they can develop his arsenal further and treat it more like a multi-year project with maybe some immediate upside.
James, you mentioned the Diamondbacks and the White Sox pitched ideas back and forth about a possible Kopech trade. Anyone else that you are hearing that's kicking the tires on Michael Kopech?
Not specifically or in a recent level that would be like, this is some breaking thing, but I think everybody looks at the fastball profile and thinks I can fix them. It's just about whether or not, what kind of price that demands in the immediate for, kind of the more dicey 2 months where it looks a little bit more like, hey, maybe hopefully you can handle the seventh inning and it doesn't blow up type of immediate production. Even, he's been obviously a lot better since the immaculate inning, but I don't think the track record's there of consistency where you'd be like, this is going to solve our this is going to solve our eighth inning or more serious problems. So I think that probably the gap between what the White Sox want to project as the ceiling and what his realistic immediate ad is the divide that has to be bridged over the final 2 days.
Well, again, if there are any trades over the next 2 days, we'll have it obviously covered on SoxMachine.com. Follow us on social media. We're at Sox Machine. Follow James on Twitter. He's at JR Fegan. We're also at the mercy of all the super agents reaching out to Jeff Passan of ESPN and Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic and everywhere. Reporters chiming in when they are hearing news and rumors. We'll be keeping our ear to the social media ground and try to gather what is real and what is not. But again, if news does come down the pipe, we will have emergency podcasts coming up before the deadline, and we'll also be streaming live Tuesday starting at 4 p.m. Central Time, covering the last hour of the trade deadline, which is always chaotic, very fun though, and see if Chris Getz and the White Sox front office can make any deals before the very last minute. Moving over quickly to what happened over the weekend on the field for the White Sox, and again, it's not a great conversation point, even though James did say in the last episode that it was very fun. All the topics we spoke about in our previous podcast, it was a very fun episode. Very depressing, as I mentioned in the show intro. The Chicago White Sox in 2024 have already clinched they will not have a winning record. It is July 28th. They are 27-81. That's a .250 winning percentage. They are on a 40.5 win pace. They are 3-19 in July. And against Seattle, this was not a competitive series. Friday night, Drew Thorpe got battered around with 2 outs in the first inning, allowed back-to-back home runs, 8 runs in the first inning. Seattle won 10-0. And Saturday and Sunday, Seattle cruised to easy wins, 6-3 over the White Sox. So the White Sox are swept again. And James, his losing streak is now 14 straight games. It's ugly out there on the field. Paul DeJong had a really rough Sunday, especially in the field at third base. He did have a 2-run homer, so it made up for a little bit. But what's the morale like right now in the White Sox clubhouse?
It's low. I mean, yeah, like it's not confident. It's definitely a little beaten down. It's definitely, a level of exhaustion about trade talk. Like Garrett Crochet post game was very like, this is a nice person who's very strange. Like he's kind of smiling as he's giving these answers that betray his like exhaustion with this. But it's clearly like Bruce Levine asked him some long question about like, do you get tired of questions like this? And Garrett just stared at him very warmly and then just said, yes. That was it. And I think they've all, like, Fedde's been asked that a lot. Fedde basically had to do like a, goodbye presser almost at his post game Saturday and, talk about what this meant for his career and to be able to basically show what he can do starting again, because he did have, we talk about the Mets or other teams that are out there. Like he did have a lot of interest. He did have a lot of teams in free agency, but a lot of them were not willing to commit to him as like a starter. That they would be like, you'd come in as a swingman or multiple innings, and then, you could earn your way to starting. Whereas the White Sox were like, you're going to be our number 2. So I think even at the idea that he had, was KBO MVP, that views him as shot, but it's all wistful and in the kind of in the rearview mirror for a lot of guys who kind of know it or feel it's inevitable. But if anything, like the performances have been so bleak and lifeless, and that you kind of wonder if some guys have played their way off of getting traded, and then what does their future indicate that if they're not going to be pieces on contender, are they going to be pushed out? Because everyone can kind of see the youth movement going on as well, where Martin Maldonado is gone and Danny Mennick's gone, and you Brooks Baldwin is about the freshest face example of you could give to, hey, we're going to start using some younger guys in there. So it was a team that was very much united under like, we're fighting together to stay in the league and show that we belong, and to have it backfire in this, and, you know, being prepared to end in both the fashion they expected, but also still brutally. It's not a great time. Still nice guys though. One of the best clubhouses we've covered in terms of like connectivity and courteousness. Nice guys will live in infamy. It's a real shame.
Nice guys finishing last.
Yeah.
Jim, Brooks Baldwin, all of a sudden, doubles machine. He went 5 for 11 over the weekend, 4 doubles. Is he finally figuring out how to hit major league pitching?
A little bit. Like, it seems like he gave himself a lot of room to improve with just how much he was pulling off pitches and really bailing out the way his upper body was carrying him towards first base as he's swinging almost like a modified Ichiro in a little bit, except he never did that in the minors. So perhaps you're seeing a little bit of settling in to where he is able to extend and cover the outer half of the plate with more regularity. Still a strikeout problem in that he's swinging and missing more than he's used to. And that's something that'll probably take a little bit of a toll on him, just having at bats end with like slow walks to the dugout, which he really didn't do all that much of in the minors, but something that resembled the way that he was playing in the minors. Because I think, we had this conversation about Lenyn Sosa not long ago, saying that you'd watch in the minors and say, here's a guy with a confident, assertive swing who's really making some impact when he puts bat to ball, and then all of a sudden gets up the majors out of control, and you're seeing it happen again in a different form from a different side of the plate with Baldwin. So see him settle down a little bit is encouraging, but still I think a long way to go in terms of closing up the gaps in his game to where it's not just like early outs or strikeouts and the league doesn't respect him enough to draw walks and get him on base. So wouldn't count a victory yet, but at least signs of progress, signs of life, signs of him resembling who he was in the minors. And that's really all I can take for now.
Well, we're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors, but will the White Sox ever win a baseball game again? Maybe. The Kansas City Royals are coming into town. We'll preview that series. Is AJ Pierzynski the next White Sox manager? We'll talk about that rumor and also chat about what's catching our attention around Major League Baseball next on the Sox Machine podcast. This episode is presented by Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. Game Time makes getting tickets even faster and easier, and prices on the app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. The Chicago White Sox play the Kansas City Royals during the week, but also keep in mind they have 2 popular series coming up in August with the New York Yankees and Chicago Cubs visiting. Those will be very popular games to attend, and the third-party pricing outlets outside of Game Time are crazy for the Cubs series. If you have tickets already, but you can't go, or you want to take advantage of the ticket demand, selling on Game Time is very easy. Just take a screenshot of your digital tickets and upload them to Game Time. Use Game Time for other sporting events like the Chicago Sky, which those tickets are hard to come by, and football season is just around the corner with Chicago Bears preseason games now available on Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code Sox Machine for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use our promo code Sox Machine for $20 off. Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. The Kansas City Royals now visit the Chicago White Sox, and the Royals are 57-48. They're third place in the American League Central. They're still 6 games back of Cleveland. They are a game and a half back of the Minnesota Twins. However, if this season were to end today, the Royals would be the 6th seed in the American League postseason picture. And the season series for the Royals against the White Sox, the Royals are 9-1 against the White Sox. So this is the last series between the Royals and White Sox in 2024. And that might be a blessing for the White Sox. In 10 games this season against Kansas City, the White Sox have only scored 12 runs. 12 runs in 10 games against the Kansas City Royals. You do not need to be a mathematical genius to figure out what the runs per game average is for the White Sox against the Royals. Scoring has been a premium and arduous task for the White Sox against Kansas City this year. Your pitching probables for this series, Monday and Tuesday, are 7:10 p.m. Central Time starts. For the Royals, Alec Marsh will make the start against Chris Flexen. A reminder, the White Sox have lost 14 straight games that Chris Flexen has pitched in. Tuesday, Michael Wacha against Jonathan Cannon. And then Wednesday afternoon at 1:10 p.m. Central Time, Drew Thorpe is hoping to bounce back from his rough start against Seattle and duplicate what he did well at Kauffman Stadium last week. He'll be going up against Brady Singer, who continues to pitch really well for the Royals this year. But the big story about the Royals after this weekend, Jim, is that Kansas City has reached win 57. Last year, they only had 56 wins. So that's pretty impressive that they've already eclipsed their win total from last year. And they could go from losing 105 games to the playoffs in one season. So let's be delusional for a moment, Jim. Is what worked for the Royals with what they did this offseason a blueprint for this White Sox organization to turn it around?
It's possible in terms of like patching up some holes, getting to be back to like an ordinary kind of bad, like where it's a huge jump in wins, still not close to the postseason race or the wild card races, but just better, not the active crisis that they are at all points this season. A couple key differences. One is Bobby Witt Jr. And then just the whole spending more to try to generate interest in stadium relocation that John Sherman was stumping for. So even like, the additions of Lugo and Wacha, is that out of the White Sox price range? If they have like terrible revenues and they have terrible TV ratings and don't see a reason to spend that, just they are still, in the Chris Flexen mode of trying to find veterans who might have some upside and spending the minimum and hoping to see some returns. So I don't see like a huge turnaround. I think if you're hoping for like one angle of it that doesn't involve Witt, perhaps could be JJ Piccolo saying that, just a year of separation from the Dayton Moore administration and having more having more confidence in his vision, having more people underneath him, implementing what he wants to see and having people he brought on with good ideas of their own that he was comfortable trusting them with. Perhaps that's one thing that could be in store with the White Sox. Another year of Chris Getz, another year of Josh Barfield, Brian Bannister, et cetera, to where you do start seeing some dividends down the system that produce more competent, capable players. And then you have also the, Matt Quatraro had the rebound that Pedro Grifol didn't, going from a disappointing season to a bounce back. But, change in leadership for the White Sox could also maybe help in that regard. But it really seems like until they get that Bobby Witt type, who's just pretty much great at everything and at the top of the order and getting the most at bats and playing every day, that having, the trickle down of just the constant threat and the excitement that generates, the White Sox don't quite have that. And so I imagine their progress will be more painstaking because it involves the word pain. For the Royals, Bobby Witt Jr. is only trailing Aaron Judge in Major League Baseball when it comes to WAR. Bobby Witt Jr. is at 6.9 WAR. The Royals have had 14 position players this year accumulate 50 or more plate appearances. The second most valuable position player for the Kansas City Royals this season is Salvador Perez. That's not a surprise. But Perez is at 2 WAR. 6.9 WAR for your leading position player. Second, 2 WAR. That is a gigantic difference, a 4.9 WAR difference between Bobby Witt, the top player for the Royals, and Salvador Perez, the second best. The Royals only have 4 position players when you include Witt and Perez that are worth 1 WAR or more. So, man, Bobby Witt Jr. is carrying the load on the position player front, but the Royals pitching has been excellent this year.
And that's what it got me thinking is if Brian Bannister and Ethan Katz, the White Sox pitching side, if they're able to keep Garrett Crochet, Jim, and maybe even crazy, they stick with Garrett Crochet for 2025, and they patch up as far as the starting rotation, the bullpen gets a little bit better. The White Sox on the pitching front, I'm assuming, is going to be more ready to bounce back than the position players. But I think you're right. Unless Luis Robert Jr. stays healthy and returns back to his 2023 form, even better than his 2023 form, like the White Sox need a 7-WAR position player to have the kind of turnaround the Royals are having this season. And right now, the only one that I can think of that can do that is Luis Robert. And that's not happening this season. And I'm not even sure if he can even get to 7-WAR. Now, the question, of course, on everyone's mind is, will the White Sox win a game this series? And I don't want to put that pressure on James to make that prediction. The franchise record is 14 straight losses, correct?
Yes.
All
2 times.
So we could see history on Monday. We could see history on Monday. 2 streaks going on.
Like many, I'm getting tired of living through history today.
So let's move over to the other topic, and again, we'll recap.
Well, before we do, like I was just thinking, like I'm not sure how it is in the stands, but watching the game at home, like whenever they have ticket promos, I'm thinking they still sell tickets to this. Like they're still allowed to charge money for the product they have. I mean, like it seems like they should have like a questionnaire that, you know, if they're playing the Royals and Royals fans are coming, sure, charge them. They'll have fun. But like if you check the White Sox box, like there's a 100% discount code attached to your order that gets you in.
105% discount code. The White Sox pay you.
And Comiskey cash, if they still have that.
I mean, the whole like better at the ballpark like slogan that they've been pushing since like halfway through last season is like, wouldn't it be good for you to go outside like regardless of like what's on the field? Shouldn't you leave the house?
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I was thinking about too was that we've been talking about the trade deadline as though in 2017 when they traded Todd Frazier and Jose Quintana and David Robertson and they lost 10 in a row, thinking what happens if that happens? And like we didn't really entertain the question, what if they lose 16 in a row heading into the deadline and then they trade all their good players? Like what's after that? So we did not anticipate, I think, the full scope of just how bad this could get.
Yeah. Well, so on Saturday, our friends, the Chicago Sports Bums, they have these tailgates, Whiskey at Comiskey. And John Triffin has visited the tailgates previously this season. It was a great time. It was a great party. But we looked over.
Is this the Triffin Minute?
No Triffin Minute.
Okay.
But we looked over to Lot C, and Lot C was empty. And yeah, I mean, the good news is it must be getting easier for people driving to games to get into the parking lot. We're not having as many issues as we had in the past trying to enter the stadium. The giveaways, it was the, who was the Bill Belichick, the short sleeve hoodie, which for fashion wise, it never made sense to me, but they were giving away the short sleeve hoodies. Now, I never really grabbed the giveaways because as a season ticket holder, they put all that junk in one box and drop it off my house sometime in January. So I automatically get all the giveaways. I don't take them so other fans could get them. But there are just boxes and boxes and boxes of giveaways. Like, I think the White Sox announced they're going to have a Carlton Fisk bobblehead. And I'm sure they're going to have, not hundreds, thousands of bobbleheads left over that people could pick up later at a garage sale. So, yeah, the giveaways are not doing much to bring fans to the ballpark. The White Sox do have an upcoming homestand, 2 against the Cubs and then 3 against the Yankees. That will draw well, but after that week in August, again, this could be the worst attended regular season for the Chicago White Sox ever since they opened Comiskey Park to U.S. Cellular Field, Guarantee Rate Field. They're going to have a tough time drawing 1.3 million fans this season. And that will have ramifications going into next season and how much Chris Getz can spend. And who will be Chris Getz's manager? So this is what I did want to ask James, because Bob Nightingale in his same Sunday mailbag article in USA Today wrote that AJ Pierzynski is the leading candidate to replace Pedro Grifol once the current White Sox manager is dismissed after the season. So seems like
I believe he said strong
candidate. Yeah.
A quiet strength.
Quiet strength. What are you? Do you think this is possible, James? Like, didn't they just kick AJ Pierzynski out of the player ambassador program? Did he talk about that?
Did they?
He made it sound like they did.
Or did he not have time for a role because he's launching his own media show and calling national broadcasts? I mean, the White Sox certainly never. All they said was like, he hasn't been one all year. We didn't react to any comments. Like, look at the media guide. He wasn't one to start the season. So I never was able to tie in the idea there was some sort of punitive removal of him from the ambassadorship. But all things are possible under Bob. I after he called the shot with Tony La Russa, I'm not going to dismiss this. There's been a little bit of like downplaying, like, okay, we'll see. Since it came out this morning from people, and I'm sure like crowning it in late July is not the sort of process that like Chris Getz had in mind for getting to hire his own manager after Grifol. So I don't think it would be I don't think it's like Grifol's fired, AJ's hired joint press release or anything like that at the end of the season. There would still be like probably arguing or if assuming that this is something that would be ownership driven or at least have to be ownership approved, that whole debate and conversation has to like take place first. I don't think it'd just be an automatic anointing or anything, but yeah, why would I dismiss it? Like, it would be as much as like I'm sure there's a decent percentage of fans that would look at it with cynicism, it would be a fan service move in the sense like here's both a World Series hero, someone they see on TV talking and sounding smart about baseball all the time, and someone they've seen be openly critical of the way things are. So you can seemingly rightfully sell him as like, this is a guy who is not satisfied with how things were and will bring changes. So I think on a broad publicity level, plus the fact that like, existing or media that covered AJ Pierzynski liked him and, viewed him as a good quote and personable. So I think it would come through with a lot of popular support, even if there'd be a fair amount of people saying like, hey, this isn't not even an internal hire. This is kind of, chasing nostalgia and not good process and what have you. I think it would have a ticket sales type of argument behind it. I just think it would need to, we're getting like the soft launching of it being kind of pushed onto us as a thing that would happen. It would need to be, there's a lot more shoving that would still need to occur from now and him being hired. But there's no way you can dismiss that suggestion or that report. You'd be crazy to.
Yeah, the Sox Fest would be buzzing, Jim, if Pierzynski was named the next White Sox manager.
Yeah, he's already going to be there anyway, right? For the reunion of the team, I mentioned.
I would assume so.
Yeah. So
how can you have a reunion without AJ?
He can bring Coop up and name his pitching coach right there.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Nightingale's reports for the White Sox manager searches, and his initial one for La Russa said they could shock the world with the next hire. The White Sox plan to reach out to one of the greatest managers in baseball history. And that was when we were like, is he flattering an old friend here? And then, we know what happened. However, when I was looking for that, because Google's messed up and makes it very hard to find, it surfaces new articles first, no matter how many, search terms you put in to try to find the one article you're looking for. I found what Nightingale said after La Russa said he wasn't coming back. And what it said there was the Chicago White Sox want to hire a veteran manager to replace Tony La Russa, not wanting to take their chance on someone with no experience. Some managers who fit the bill: Bruce Bochy, Mike Shildt, Ron Washington, John Gibbons, Bo Porter, Joe Girardi, Joe Madden. Bochy, Washington, and Shildt are considered leading candidates. And they ended up with Pedro Grifol. So, he's not always right. And, given how close he is with La Russa, that kind of, that gave that some added credibility that we should have seen at the time. But in this case, this might be a little bit further afield to where he's hearing what one person is saying, but doesn't have the full picture like he did with the Grifol hunt. So my objection to Pierzynski is when he was a player, terrible reputation with how he treated younger players, and the White Sox clubhouse is going to be younger players. I remember Brandon McCarthy and Addison Reed. I think there was one more. First chance they had facing him as a member of another team, plunked him because they just didn't like working with him. Yeah. And the thing, yeah, there's possible people change. Like, Pierzynski has a kid who's a well-regarded high school player, so perhaps he's been around younger players more, even if they're at the prep level. Is out of that mode of defending his own job and defending, his paycheck and warding off all competition, and is more about, trying to help players get better. But, based on how much it feels like fan service, and, I would invite Pierzynski to talk to Robin Ventura about how it goes when you hire somebody with no experience based on name recognition, trying to do like a feel good approach to replacing a manager after a very tumultuous ending is kind of a bad idea and not a recipe for success.
Yeah, this rumor really reminds me of Robin Ventura. And the thing with Pierzynski, maybe he'll even address this on his own show, Foul Territory, that's every day, Monday through Friday. So we may even get another update after recording
perhaps
this episode.
Content.
Yes, it's his content. Like, AJ, media-wise, is doing well, but he's got no coaching experience. And he played under Robin and knew what that experience was like. When things were going well for Robin and when things quickly went sour for Robin. Like, I don't know. I don't know if you want to go down that path. I think it's bizarre, but to James's point, you can't discount it because it would definitely get the fan base riled up, but I just don't know if it will mean success is coming for the Chicago White Sox. I could imagine a lot of screaming, a lot of headbutting, but I'm assuming the White Sox are going to hire the opposite of Pedro Grifol with their next manager. And is that AJ Pierzynski? Is he the opposite of Pedro Grifol? I don't know.
Is a healthy head of hair.
He's got hair. Yeah, that's a start. So we'll see. And I'm sure AJ will chime in again on his show. He'll dedicate his own segment, and we'll see. We'll see what he thinks about that rumor. Now, around Major League Baseball, as we conclude this episode of the Sox Machine podcast, the ones notes for me, I'll start. Tampa Bay's fire sale. If you look at the standings, though, it's a bit surprising. They are 54-52. They're just 3 games back at Kansas City. Tampa Bay being Tampa Bay, watch. They sell at the deadline, still find a way to sneak into the postseason. Tyler Fitzgerald. Is he the next Trevor Story? He had 5 consecutive games of the home run for the San Francisco Giants. In this month, Fitzgerald for the Giants has 8 home runs in 46 at-bats. That's a .978 slugging percentage. And he was the Giants' 2019 fourth-round pick. For those that are downstate, Fitzgerald is from Springfield, Illinois. He played his college ball at Louisville. So it sounds like a White Sox guy through and through, but instead he's doing this for the San Francisco Giants. So that's what caught my attention. In the National League, along with the Giants, they're starting to play better. The Dodgers have won 7 of their last 10 games. They just won a series in Houston. San Diego and Arizona have also won 7 of their last 10 games. And they are starting to take away some of those playoff spots available in the National League. So pay attention to the National League West as things get pretty tight for those coveted playoff spots. James, how about you? What is catching your attention around Major League Baseball?
I'm tempted to go, I think the AL Central is really interesting, and I did think the Twins are kind of the team I still look at their roster and lineup and think is stronger, and I expect them to keep waiting for them to run away with it any minute now, or at least kind of make a surge. Obviously they can't run away with it. They're currently behind. The Astros being in first place is interesting because I think, especially the first couple of months, and obviously they did well to move on from someone who's hitting the worst hitter of baseball at first base. But they're in the lead, and I think it's still kind of a very flawed, top heavy team with a lot of their core really aging, or at least getting to the end of their control in terms of Alex Bregman. And it's kind of an ownership group that seems very motivated to win now without a ton of prospects to necessarily do it. But we haven't really seen them make a big move as far as adding that they seem to signal that they want to do, and certainly would have to feel like they can hold off, two teams that, especially with the Rangers, I think are probably more talented than them, and at least the Mariners are going to be able to be in it with their pitching, and are certainly aggressively adding at the moment. So they've at least been, hinted at as a possible, or I think would be a fit for Fedde, and certainly have needs for sort of the not that great rentals that the Sox could offer, especially with Kyle Tucker's recovery being so ambiguous. Why not have Tommy Pham fill that gap for a little bit? So I'm one at the same time, they don't have the tons of prospect depth that get you really excited, but I think it would probably lift spirits, at least from the Twitter mentions I see, if in addition to maybe, getting great returns on Fedde or his best, or Kopech or his best chips, or Crochet. It seems like Sox fans would also want to see some volume of moves to indicate activity. So if they're able to clear the decks, so to speak, with some of the rentals Pham, even throwing Brebbia or DeYoung, or Bob did float Chris Flexen again as somebody they could move. It seems like that would, at least, even if it's not like you're acquiring future core players, show that they were really, trying to wrench every inch out of this deadline. And I think a lot of GMs would concede that a lot of deadline activity is about showing people that you care, whether it's trying to show a contending team or the clubhouse that you're trying to improve the team, you think you can go for it, or riling up the fan base and to get excited for the last 2 months. Sox are on the other end of it, where things are so bad on field that it seems like just finding homes for some of these pieces and showing you're trying to maximize this opportunity, this window of being the worst team ever that has no reward in the draft, would at least be something to cheer. So it's these mid-level teams like the Astros, what they'll do in the final 2 days. It interests me.
How about you, Jim? What's catching your attention around baseball?
Dylan Cease allowing 2 hits over his last 3 starts combined. I was curious about just watching his whole season and him cutting his walk rate dramatically, but not seeing any improvement in the results. And now here comes the improvement in the results. And it seems like Chris Sale still has control of the Cy Young race, but I mean, the way he is throwing and the way the Braves starters keep falling apart. And in our VC chat talking about, Reynaldo Lopez and how he went from being carefully managed, this stretching back out to starting, to being a necessary starter. Now he has forearm issues. I wonder if Chris Sale, might, have to encounter the same thing of just, all of a sudden being so necessary to the Braves, rather than this neat little trick that they pulled to generate, trading for a 4th or 5th starter in terms of need and where he fit in and what he'd accomplished recently versus what he's actually capable of doing, and looking like a top flight starter again. So watching the NL Cy Young race to see if Cease, because if he continues this, not just 2 hits over 3 starts, but just this level that he'd been hinting at by addressing his biggest flaw as a pitcher to date, that, he could make a late push for it. So there's that. The other thing that's kind of fascinating to me is the flattening of the American League. And just when I hear, read tweets or, pick up the occasional thing from MLB Network about a reaction to a game, a blown lead or a comeback, I realize I really have no idea how any American League team is doing. It feels like they're either on, they should blow up the team. I thought they were doing well. And all of a sudden you're seeing, calls for trade everybody or fire the manager and such. And then, vice versa, to where oh, here comes, the Red Sox, who are probably the best example of this, as being a team that didn't seem like they're all intent on accomplishing things. Now they're pushing for it. But I look at the standings and no team is hot. And no team is cold. You look at the last 10, the Rays, who are just blowing up their team, are 6-4. The Blue Jays, also sellers, are 6-4. The Oakland A's are 7-3. Everybody else is 5-5 or worse. So it seems like right now, nobody is really taking advantage of any downturn. They're all just beating each other up, taking losses that feel like gut punches, except you look down the standings and everybody's taking their gut punch loss or their series loss. How could they lose that team? And I think the deadline will do a lot for, I think, vibes, if nothing else, because right now there seems to be some stagnation in terms of which teams are pulling away or which teams look like the favorites.
Well, to that point, Jim, in the American League, to me, it feels like it's inevitable. After the wild card round, we are destined to have a Baltimore-New York division series, that 5-game series. And that division series, to me, will feel like the American League Championship Series. There's 2 really strong teams in the American League, and to your point, everybody else. And that even includes the Cleveland Guardians, in which if the season were to end today, the Guardians would be the number 1 seed. So I guess if the Guardians can hold off and earn quote-unquote home field advantage as the number 1 seed, even though I would not like their chances against like the Yankees in a 5-game series or any type of game series, period. I still feel like we're going to have an inevitable Orioles versus Yankees postseason series this year, and that will determine who wins the American League pennant.
Possible. I think, with the Orioles and Yankees, I think, the deadline will have a lot to say, and the Yankees did add Jazz Chisholm. So they have made at least one big move. Could be more moves in the offing, but I think the Orioles, they have some holes to fill in some ways, I think, to shed their, the way they built the roster and, carefully constructed this vision and now have more bats than spots. Like, now would seem to be the time to make that push for talent everybody can identify as, been there and not, there's always a chance of any team kind of flaming out in the first round, no matter how much you do to try to build that team for October. But I think, after last year's little bit of a disappointment, I think if they did 2 years in a row, they'd be like, are you serious about this? Or are you building the best team on paper? Or are you building like the best 40-man roster, but, aren't necessarily concerned with, maybe leaving a little bit too much up to chance or not really, capturing the imagination of both the players and the industry by making those big pushes. I mean, Corbin Burns, that was a great move. And I think that did a lot over the winter, but injuries since I think have, opened the need for at least one more pitcher.
I wonder, though, with Baltimore, how much their hands are tied.
They got Eflin, right? So I mean, there's that, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, they have an ownership change that's being finalized.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a difference between it's been completed and it's finalized. So it's still in flux. Like, they're still in transition. So I wonder if the Baltimore front office doesn't know how much money they can add to their payroll until that has been secured. So I wonder just how much their hands are currently tied right now and if things will change this upcoming offseason. But it'd be nice for the Orioles front office if they knew, hey, is this sale finalized? Yes. Can I spend money? Can I add money to the payroll so we can make it to the World Series? Because we could use some help. That will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Let us know in the comments section on the podcast page on SoxMachine.com what's catching your guys' attention around Major League Baseball outside of the White Sox, because we'll never know if the White Sox win again. Maybe they won't. Maybe it goes from, is this team going to win 40 games to, is this team going to win 30 games? They still haven't hit that milestone yet in 2024.
I'm trying to picture what that's like.
You're gonna survive, James.
Just, a losing streak that reaches like 60 games.
Oh man, I don't know what we would do. We'd be punch drunk if they lose 20 straight games. Which it's on the table. 3 against the Royals here, and then after the trade deadline, they go to Minneapolis to face the Twins. So it doesn't get any easier for the White Sox.
I think gambling investigations would be launched if it got to that point.
Well, that'll make things interesting. Again, that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. If you just discovered the podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You could also listen to the show and watch it on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. As I mentioned earlier before, follow us on social media. We're on all the platforms at Sox Machine. You can follow James at JR Fegan. You can follow me at SoxMachine_Josh. To unlock all access of our coverage of the Chicago White Sox, which James has been doing awesome work interviewing the recent White Sox draftees and the lesser-known White Sox prospects. Jim is working on some feature stories as well, along with everything that's going to be happening up to the trade deadline. Sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine with monthly plans starting at $5. You also receive ad-free versions of both the podcast and the website. We also have additional tiers of support that earn you additional benefits. Also, we have a couple spots open in our Veterans Committee, our VC group. So if you want to be part of the group chat and be able to ask James directly what he is hearing, you can be part of that group as well. You can inquire and sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside James Fegan and Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.